Hey guys, this is Chris Monk at Highline Guitars, and you're watching episode 63 from the Luthier's Workbench. This episode is going to be the first of what I think will be a 3 or 4 part series where I'm going to talk about how I'm building this Apollyon 6-string Floyd Rose guitar. Now, the purpose of this series is not to go into every single technique in excruciating detail. If I tried to do that, it would probably be a 400-hour, 20-part series. And I don't really want to go into that kind of detail. I have other videos that cover a lot of those subjects anyway. So what I want to do instead is I want to cover the order of steps that I follow when I build a guitar, because I think the order that you follow is critical for achieving success when building a guitar. Now, everybody has a different order that they do things, and that's fine. Some of you will agree with my order of doing things and others won't, but I hope to be able to explain the rhyme and reason behind why I do things the way I do them. So let's get started. Before I can actually make the guitar, I have to design it first. So I'll spend hours sitting at my computer designing all the components so I can check their integrity as well as establish the tool paths necessary to run my CNC machine. Once I'm satisfied with the design, I'll start to gather the wood that I'll use for the build. Here I've just finished gluing up a scarf joint for an angled headstock. 2 1/2-inch thick pieces of ash are glued together for the top, and 2 1.5-inch thick slabs of mahogany are glued together for the body. The first cuts I'll make with my CNC machine is to use a very tiny milling bit to cut the slots for the frets in the fretboard blank. Then I'll switch to a slightly larger bit to drill the holes for the fret marker dots. This guitar will have a 10-inch fretboard radius, and the CNC does a nice job of carving that radius. The last step in making the fretboard is to cut out the perimeter shape. And this is what the finished fretboard looks like fresh off the CNC machine. Now I'm ready to move on to the neck, and that begins by carving the slot for the truss rod. Next, I can flip the blank over and use the CNC to carve the back contour of the neck. I used a drill press for the tuner holes and cut the actual shape of the headstock using my bandsaw. Some things are just faster when done manually than on the CNC machine. Next up is the top. In this case, it's going to have a contour carve. So I'm using the CNC machine not only to cut the pockets, but to cut that contour. There are a number of operations involved in cutting the body. Here I'm doing the pockets for the pickups and the tremolo cavity. I use a pin alignment system so I can flip the body blank over. Everything that's carved into the front has to line up very precisely with everything that's going to be carved into the back. I also use my CNC machine to carve the easy access neck joint and the belly carve. I'm done with most of the CNC work at this point, so I can kind of dummy everything together to see what I've got. CNC machines are great tools, and they're definitely the present and the future of guitar building. However, there's still some steps in the process I like to do by hand. I use my quarter sheet sander and 80 grit sandpaper to begin the sanding process. After the 80 grit, I'll switch to hand sanding and work my way up to 220 grit. Then I'll apply some water-based crystal lac sanding sealer over the entire surface of the guitar neck. I do this mainly because the guitar neck may sit for a while before I put any finish on it, and I don't want it to absorb a lot of moisture from the air. After the crystal lac has dried, I'll sand off the raised grain with some 220 grit sandpaper. I'll finish the sanding with 1000 and 2000 grit Mirka Apollyon pads to give it that really smooth feel. Now I'm ready to install the double action truss rod. I'll put down some masking tape directly over the truss rod just to keep the glue that I'm about to apply from getting into the slot itself. I use Titebond wood glue for all the wood gluing on my guitars. After removing the masking tape, I'll carefully spread out the glue with an old plastic credit card. Now I'll set the fretboard carefully into position, and I'll lightly clamp it for about 5 minutes just to let the glue tack up. That way when I clamp it later, the fretboard won't slip. Here I'm using my homemade clamping caul, which puts most of the clamping pressure along the edges of the fretboard and the neck. That way I'm not putting pressure over the truss rod. I think that's enough clamps. Now it's back to the body. I'll sand this in much the same way as I did the neck. I'll start out with my quarter sheet sander and some 80 grit sandpaper just to remove most of the tool marks left by the CNC machine. I also like to use a random orbital sander on a Carve top. It just does a better job. After machine sanding with the 80 grit, I'll switch to hand sanding and I'll work from 100 all the way up to 220 grit sandpaper. There's still a few more holes that I need to drill into the body, so I'll take care of that now. Here I'm drilling the holes for the neck screws. And then I'll drill the hole for the recessed jack. A little bit of final sanding and then I'll be ready to start applying the finish. I like to use artist oil paints to color tint my guitar bodies, and in this case what I want to do is I want to accentuate the appearance of the grain. So what I'm doing is I'm using artist oil paints, which have been thinned with mineral spirits, and I'll apply that over the surface of the body. Then I'll wipe it down with a rag that has a little bit of Japan dryer added to it, and that will help speed up the drying process of the oil paint. Another cool benefit to using artist oil paint as a way to accentuate the grain and the pores is it will also accentuate unsightly sanding scratches that may not have been noticeable after you thought you were finished sanding. Here I've deliberately left in some of the curlicue scratches so you can see what I'm talking about. Obviously, as I applied the dark artist oil paint, those scratches were highlighted and now you can really see them. All I have to do now is let the artist oil paint dry, which will take a few hours, and then I'll go back in and I'll lightly sand those out with some 220 grit, and that'll remove those scratches. I can actually watch them disappear as I sand. Then, if necessary, I'll go back in and just reapply some of that black artist oil paint thinned with mineral spirits and a little bit of Japan dryer, and I'll be good to go.